Let us look at the production possibility curve, also known as the production possibility frontal. Right. So it is a curve showing the maximum combination of quantity of commodities which may be produced from a given level of resources. So basically what we're saying is, it is basically a graph, right? And this graph is in a curved form, right? Curved form. And it's basically in a curved form. It actually shows a combination of two products or commodities which can be combined to maximize output, right? So it's a combination of two commodities which may be produced from a given level of resources. So the resources that you have, what is the maximum that you can produce by combining these two commodities? So it is basically showing in the types of combinations that you can make, that you can maximize the available resources. So basically that's it. So the production possibility curve is also called a production possibility frontal or production transformation curve. So it's basically in a curve. As I said, there's a lot of graphs that we're going to be doing here. This one is probably the first, right? So you have your graph running like this. So the curve is like this. It's concave, right? Concave, right? The shape is concave. It protrudes. The curve protrudes, right? Here on the y-axis is one commodity, right? Let's say commodity 1, and here commodity 2. So you are looking at this curve, and within the line here is the maximum output. So if I was to produce, for example, these are numbers, right? Let's say here I can produce 10 of commodity A, right? It means that commodity B, commodity 2, I can produce maybe, let's say 5, right? Let me increase this one. For example, I can produce 7 of commodity 2. It means here I can only produce 8. So it's basically the combination that I can make to maximize output with these given resources, right? So that's basically it, right? You can't produce anything outside this curve. It's impossible, right? Because this is the maximum that you can produce with the available resources. Available resources. If you produce anything within this, right? For example, you produce around here. It means that you're underutilizing the resources. You are underutilizing the resources. So the basic economic problem of scarcity can be well illustrated using this possibility curve, right? For example, a society can spend its income on two products, food and guns. So the money, let's say the resources is in form of money. So the money that they have, they can actually spend on food and guns, right? Those are the choices that they have made, right? In terms of priority, they have made what to produce. So they have identified that these are the two products that we need to produce: food and guns. So that's basically it, right? So the resources in the economy are limited, that they cannot produce all the foods that they want and all the guns that they want. So they have to compromise, right? So they are restricted on the amount of food they can produce and the amount of guns that they can produce. That's why we say that because of scarcity, you have to make choices, right? So it's basically this one. This graph was actually not written okay, but I'll use the same one, but I'll have to make some correction. So you have G1 here, I'm sure G here has to be G3, which doesn't even make sense. Anyway, G3, that means here G5. Is it? Yeah, no, it's not like this. So it's supposed to be here G1. G1 is basically going to be here. Although it was supposed to be okay, G1 is supposed to be here at the end here. So you have so you have G1 here, then you have G3 here, then you have G5 here, then you have G2 here, G2 here. Is it 1, 2, 3? Then G4, right? Something like that. Or I think it's not supposed to be like that. So I'm thinking it's supposed to be G4 here, then G2 here, then G5 here, then G4. So G2 here, then G5 here, G3 here, G1 here. Something like that. So here I think it's okay. So you can see they are aligned properly. So what we're saying is, along this line here is where we can produce the maximum output. We're interested with the maximum output. That means, for example, we can produce at this point. At that point, it means that we can produce F2 of food, that's a number, and G5, G5 of the guns, right? Same applies here. We can produce F3 of food and G1 of the guns. But this point is unattainable, right? Because it's outside the possibility curve, right? It means that it is using more than the available resources. So this point is unattainable unless the resources are increased. But at that level of resources that they have, this point is unavailable, is unattainable, right? And at this point right here, it means that they are underutilizing the available resources, right? They're underutilizing the available resources. So basically, that's to do with that possibility curve. So it's actually a curve that shows the maximum combination of quantities of commodities which may be produced from a given level of resources, right? That's to do with that. So all that is actually explaining that the graph there, right? So that's how it works. That means, for example, at F1 here, right, they can choose to produce F1 of food and 0 guns. They could choose that, right? 0 guns, right? Because you can see it's at that point F1, but G at that point G is at 0, right? It means that they can choose that all the money should be spent on food. And here at the end here, they can also choose that all the money should be spent on guns and none on food. So basically, that's how you do it, right? So it's supposed to be within this line, right? This line. That's where maximum is. Outside the line, it's unattainable, right? Unless the resources have been increased. Within, that means you're underutilizing the resources, right? So let's look at what are the importance of this production possibility curve or frontal. So the first importance is that the production possibility curve shows that there is scarcity of resources and the impact that this has on the output of various commodities. It actually highlights that there are indeed limited resources and how this is impacting on the outcome of commodities. That's basically it. We saw here that we know we can't produce everything, right? All the guns and all the food. So it's showing us that the amount that we can, it's either we can choose at this point or at this point or any place around this point, right? Because we cannot produce everything, right? So basically, that's the first important, right? The first importance being that it shows that resources are scarce and how this impacts on the output, right? The second thing is that it shows the need to make a choice about what to produce when it is not possible to have everything. So another thing about this curve is that it will actually show that we will have to make a choice of what to produce, right? So we'll make a choice. If either we choose to produce at any level, right? Right. So basically, that's the same thing. It shows that we have to make a choice. That's the second importance of this. The third is that it can be appreciated from the figure above that if we are to have a combination G2 of G and F2 of F, it means to produce G3 has been forgone while F2 has been decreased. Therefore, the opportunity cost of producing F3 has been forgone. So we also introduced that if we make a choice, there's always opportunity cost. So they were talking about for example, if we were to produce it at F2 and G3, F2 and G3, I'm sure F2 and G3 is supposed to be somewhere here. I don't know how this was supposed to be arranged. Probably this is where it's supposed to be G3. I think, I'm not sure, but I think G3 is supposed to be somewhere here. So they were talking about this point right here, right? So if they are talking about this point, right, where F2 and G3 here, right, at this point. So if we were to choose at that point, we should know that we could have produced F1, that is more, right? But we have chose to produce this point, right? It means that we have forgone this amount of units of food. That's opportunity cost. Same applies here, right? Same applies here. We can see that it was from, I think G1 to G3, something like that, right? Although the numbers were not labeled correctly, right? They were not labeled correctly, but you can see that if we are producing at this level, right, we should have produced at this level, right? Right, more, but we have chose to produce this, right? It's like we have what? Forgone some items there, right? That's the opportunity cost. So we can see that the importance are just set out there, right? The first is that it will actually show that there are scarce resources and the impact on outcome. The first one, it shows that we have to make a choice on what to produce. And thirdly, it actually shows that there is always going to be an opportunity cost for making these economic choices. There are always going to be opportunity cost for making these choices. So these are the three importance of the production possibility curve. Right. Now let's look at shifting in the production possibility curve. So the production possibility curve can shift, right? The shift can either be rightwards or leftwards. So the shift can either be rightwards or leftwards. Let me sketch the possibility again. So we have this, and this is basically the maximum, right? So it can either shift to the right. So to the right is this way, right? That means it can shift to, let's say, here, or leftwards. So this is basically the shifting. So we have two. the rightward shift and the leftward shift. So let's first look at the rightward shift, which is also called the upward lift or the outward lift. You can see now this one, right? It seems to go outwards. It's going out. Or it seems as if it's going up. If we look at this perspective, it's going up, right? So it's the same thing, right? The rightward, the upward, or the rightward, right? So when the production possibility curve shifts to the right, it means that there is economic growth, indicating the economy is producing more goods or services than before. We saw at first it was on the blue line. It was on the blue line. So it was right here on the blue line, right? So that's where it was. It was on the blue line there. So a number of things, right? I think it was there. So it was on the blue line. So we could see, all right, they can produce maybe guns at this point and food at this point, right? Let's say F2 and G3, right? We said anything outside was impossible, right? But if there is a shift of this to the right, it means that we have economically grown. It means we have increased our resources, right? It means if we produce at this level, it will be within the possibility curve. It means what? We are underutilizing. It means we could increase maybe to here and here. You can see now we have produced more because the line here has shifted to the right. So the shift to the right just means that there has been economic growth. There has been economic growth. We can produce more of the goods and services. Our resources have increased, right? So it's either our resources have increased or other factors. So what are the causes of the rightward shift? What could make an economy be able to produce more goods and services? So the first is that there has been increased labor force. At first, you had limited resources, right? You had limited resources in terms of labor force because the labor is a resource, right? So because of our limited resource, for example, a small country, right? We had limited resources. We could not produce a lot. Because of that, we were producing less. But there's been an increase in labor force. That means now we can produce more. That's why some countries which have less population encourage people to come into their country. Why do you think so? If you have heard some countries, they encourage people to come into their country. They'll give them working permits, living permits. They can stay there. Why? They know that they have less people, less labor resource. So for them to actually shift the curve, they are attracting people. By attracting people, it means that there will be an increase in labor force. So that's why there would be that shift. Another cause of the shift is improvement in the method of production, like use of machinery. So you have started to use other methods of production. For example, you were actually doing it by hand. Now you're using machinery, right? Now you can produce more, right? It means if you were producing 10 a day, you can now produce 1,000 a day because machines can work faster, more precisely, right? So because of that, we are now able to produce more. Even though maybe the labor was small, but because we're actually mechanizing everything, right? It means that we can produce more. It means that it will actually shift the what? Shift the line, the curve to the right. Another thing is discovery of new natural resources. So we were able to produce, let's say we were actually producing oil, right? We had one source, right? Maybe we are producing, let's say, maybe 50 liters. So you are able to produce, let's say, 1,000 liters of oil. It's a small resource that you have. So you are able to produce a year, 1,000 liters of oil. Just few, right? But you have identified another source, for example, in one of the rivers, right? Right? It means that you have identified that that's also another place where you can actually mine oil. So you can produce another 500,000, right? So because you have identified the new natural resources, now you can actually produce more, right? So these are some of the causes of the rightward shift. And it is one common question that actually comes. What are the causes of rightward shift? So it's increase in labor, right? Improvement of methods of production, or discovery of new natural resources. Now, the opposite is the leftward, right? The leftward, also called the inwards or the downwards. So it's basically this one in green, right? In green. So this one, if it moves to the left, it means that the economy is unable to produce as much as before. So if we move to left, it means that now zintuzi zikuenda. Because if it is here on F2 and the G3, right, we're able to produce at this point. Now it has shifted. It means that we can no longer produce at this point because we cannot achieve it. It's not attainable, right? Because now you can see we have shift to the green line, right? To the green line. So because they're shifted to the green line, we cannot achieve that one. That means we'll have to what? To reduce our production, right? Our production, right? So it's not a good thing. That isn't since we end up with. What could cause this, right? Significant decrease in the population. Like there was a world war or there was something, right? A lot of people have died. It means that labor will also be low, right? Because of that reason, we can no longer produce as much as we did. Exhaustion of natural resources. So our mineral sites have been exhausted. We can no longer mine that mineral resource. That means we can no longer produce that, right? Switching to obsolete method of production. You have actually switched to something that is what? Absolute. For example, you're using machinery, then you're saying that we'll be using human people, right? So basically, that's something that can cause that. It's not a good thing when they what? The possibility curve actually shift to the left, right? Shift. We want it always to shift to the right, right? That means we can now be able to produce more. So basically, that's it. Now, let's look at two concepts that we should be familiar with. And these are the approaches to study of economics. The approaches or to study economics. So there are two approaches that we have to be familiar with. The first approach is the normative economics. Normative economics. And the other one is the positive economics. So these two have to be aware of, right? You should be aware of these two approaches to economics. So first, let's look at the normative economics, right? So this approach involves the use of value judgment. So the most important thing is that there has been a use of judgment. Value judgments. So you are using judgments. So it is actually concerned with using subjective statements, because when we say that something is subjective, it means that somebody is using what he feels or what he feels is right. That's being subjective, right? So what should or ought to happen, right? An example of, for example, the normatic approach is, for example, one economics can support the idea that government prioritizing to reduce the rate of inflation, while others will support the idea that it is more important to reduce unemployment. So basically, you could see there are two people actually what? Giving two different suggestions on how they feel things are supposed to be done. That's why we're saying that is based on value judgment. How one feels. That's why we're saying subjectively. right? So one economist could say that for a government for a government to actually move on well, an economy to move on well, they have to prioritize in reducing inflation. Katundu Asagwele, right? Right? They have to reduce inflation. While another one could say that if we were to prioritize, we should prioritize in that reducing unemployment. So you can see one is actually saying one thing based on what he feels is of more value, while the other one is also saying something else, right? That's because everyone has the right to make their own judgment, right? So the normative is based on a value judgment or based on a subjective approach to economics. What you feel is more important, right? Then while positive is to do with testable theories, the theory has been tested. It is what it is, right? So in other words, it is concerned with objective statements. So it's based on something being objective. It is what it is, right? So what will happen if this happens? For example, the idea that reducing interest rates leads to fall in aggregate demand, right? So it's something that has been tested that if you are going to reduce the interest rate, then the aggregate demand will fall. It's not something that someone feels, but is based on tested. Or for example, this is not to do with economics, but you can't live without water. It's been tested, right? There's no argument about that, right? Right? So if the thing is based on testable theory, that's what is called positive economics. It's objective. No two ways about it. While when it is based on value judgment, it is subjective, then that's a normative approach to economics. Now, along the chapter, we looked at the concept of allocating limited resources. But we saw that economics is all about how limited resources will be allocated or distributed, right? Because of this thing of saying that we have to allocate these resources, there are three basic economic decisions or questions that economics will always answer, right? And we saw these decisions being that what goods and services should be produced, how will these goods and services be produced, and to whom these goods and services will be distributed. So these are the very key questions or decisions that economists will always make when it comes to allocating these scarce resources, making a choice on these scarce resources. So let us understand what we mean by what goods and services will produce. So in a market economy, this will depend on what the consumers will want to buy and what will they pay for each product or service. The decision of what will be produced relates to the demand and supply. So as we proceed, we'll look at systems of economy, right? And one of the systems of economy is a free market economy, right? So in this section, they were trying to refer to this free market economy, right? So in the free market economy, what goods and services to be produced is determined by demand and supply. What people are demanding and what people would supply. So these two forces will actually determine what goods and services to produce in a free market economy. So we're looking at one perspective of if the system is a free market economy, then what to produce will be determined on these two forces, demand, supply, right? But in general, this question is to look at what kind of products can we prioritize or what should we produce in this case. So we're saying that if it is a free market economy system, then the forces of demand and supply will actually determine which services or goods to be produced. Now, looking at the second question, how will these goods and services be produced? So, producers or suppliers of goods and services might be small companies, large companies, state-owned government. The choices about who will produce the goods will depend on the cost of resources and efficiency of resource utilization. So it's basically how and who, right? Basically, sometimes it's how and who produce the goods and services. So we can see that it's a small company can be the one that produces, or a large company, or a state-owned. As I gave an example of Eskom, right? So basically that's it, right? So electricity in Malawi is produced by a parastate or a state-owned company, right? So it's basically who produces a state-owned company, right? With why they made a choice to choose maybe a state-owned company to manage any electrician generation. Maybe they saw that maybe they are best at what? Resource utilizations, or maybe efficiency, right? It depends on what they want. Maybe they wanted that the electricity itself should not be so expensive. So for that reason, they are eliminating the element of making a lot of profits, right? But focusing on the people. They make profit, but not a lot of profit, as compared if it was a commercial company, right? So basically that's it, right? So they will make those decisions in economy. All right. We want to now see that, all right? We can see that other companies, at first they were maybe state-owned, maybe now they are private-owned, right? Now they are private-owned. Now they saw that maybe we're not in a better place on what? Producing this goods or service. Maybe the private would do it better, right? Commercial companies would do it better, right? So it's like they have made another decision on that, right? So how and who will produce will actually revolve around this, right? Who's actually producing? Is it a government? Is it a small company, a big company, right? And how are they? This is all depending on how they feel that the resources will be utilized, efficiency, and so those decisions will revolve on who will produce, how will they produce these goods and services. And lastly, to whom the goods and services will be distributed. Who are you giving these goods to, right? So some goods are distributed for free by the government. For example, healthcare education in Malawi is for free. You don't have to pay for it, right? We're talking about public schools, right? So distribution of goods and services will depend on the distribution of income and wealth or in the society. Some people have the financial resources to enjoy great quantity of goods and services of the highest quality. So in terms of distribution, right, sometimes it will depend on what is the wealth distribution. If you have a lot of money, you definitely can consume a lot of what? That product, right? That product. If you have less money, you produce less. So in terms of the distribution, some of these items maybe that have to be paid for, right? Means that those that have a lot of money will be the ones that what consumes a lot of these goods and services. So basically, that's to do with that. That's basically to do with that. So in the next, we'll look at the economic systems, right? Economic systems. So in the economic systems, we'll look at planned economy, free market, and others. Thank you.